I have waited so long for this to come about. I mean, the length of time is only really a year, but I had planned an idea of I wanted to go back, revisit the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and review them all. And I needed a reason other than just to rewatch them for the sake of my own indulgence. And it turned out that getting the 4K Ultra HD Infinity Saga box set, that was the way to get into it. So today I am starting my first out of the 23 installments into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'm reviewing Iron Man, directed by Jon Favreau, written with a screenplay from Mark Fergus and Hawk Osby. Hawk? A man named Hawk? It's awesome. Love it. Cinematography by Matthew Libatique. Music by Ramin Djawadi. Things that most people don't know about this movie. It was actually nominated for 2 Oscars. I don't ever hear anyone talking about that. It's crazy. It was also nominated for a BAFTA for the special effects, the special visual effects. So if you don't know, Iron Man is a surprisingly grounded story set in the now well-known Marvel Cinematic Universe, centered around the selfish and narcissistic but incredibly charming Tony Stark, the billionaire arms dealer and wildly successful technological innovator. When Stark is making a routine arms deal with the US government, he gets captured by an organization known as the Ten Rings. Whilst imprisoned, he is cared for by a man named Yeltsin, who saved him from being mortally wounded by one of his own weapons that the terrorists had acquired for themselves. There he is told that he needs to make them his newest weapon, the Jericho missile, and in return he'll be set free. Instead, knowing that he'll be killed, likely by the end, he decides to create the Iron Man armor and decides to take back all of his weapons that had gone into the wrong hands. You know what it's like. You get into the situation where, I'm going to watch those series of movies again. I'm going to watch the Spider-Man trilogy, or I'm going to watch, the Matrix trilogy or whatever. And at the beginning, you got to go through the rigmarole of, this is the origin story. This is how they came about. This is what happened. And often it can lead you a bit, bored, because you know what happened. You know the story. We know what happened to Uncle Ben. We don't need to go there again. And it can be a bit dull because you just want to get into the swing of how incredibly acrobatic Spider-Man becomes when he understands how to web sling. But when you're watching Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, because of the focus of character first that Favreau has adopted from the very beginning, it's just so fun to see those characters again, to see where they were, see how imperfect they were, not just in a literary way, but how they were clearly not as good as people as we remember them, seeing how far they have grown and seeing where they came from, looking back. It does actually enrich the experience. When you're watching Spider-Man, who's already technically a good person, gets superpowers and then can do something about it, it's not as fun to watch that origin story again, because there's nothing particularly conflicting about his character. It's only when he makes the mistake, letting the robber go away and losing his uncle, that's where the complication comes. You have to wait for that blip in his moral code to appear. With Tony, he's just not a great person, but he's still fantastic to watch as a character. He's just very interesting. Even by the end of the story, his character is still flawed. He hasn't somehow magically changed into a completely new super heroic person. He's actually just still, there's still something wrong, and he still has something to learn, and that makes it even more investing, because we want to see those things iron out and him to learn new lessons, make new mistakes. So it is really great to revisit the story, and it didn't feel tiresome. I wasn't bored at all watching this movie again. Getting to the meat and potatoes, it's a 4K port as something that usually isn't native to 4K being like taken and then put into a new technology. Usually be pretty skeptical about it. I don't know if you guys seen Groundhog Day on Netflix in 4K. That looks peculiar. It just looks weird. It's just strange. It just doesn't. It's just not meant to look like that. It's not. It doesn't have. It's not the quality or anything. It's just you can see. It's like a microscopic lens looking at like bacteria moving around because there's so much film grain, and the film grain is almost like upscale, so you can see so much going on. It's not the best thing to watch. But in this case, Iron Man was filmed in 35mm film, so there's a lot of leeway with it being in 4K because it's already much higher in resolution considering it was shot on film, but it's still formatted in a way that translates well into 4K. It was fine in 1080, but when you think about how often this can be like a deal breaker with a lot of people, it looks fantastic. I mean, I've gone back to the Blu-ray edition, I've looked at like other versions of it. It does look better. I mean, it just looks really good in 4K. It looks fantastic. Out of the 23 movies, only 2 of those movies were actually filmed in 4K digital, which was Infinity War and Endgame. But it doesn't really detract from the fact that if something as old as 2008 looks good already in 4K Ultra HD, then I can't imagine that the other ones are going to look that bad on the way. But we'll see. Production value, especially in the first phase, vary quite a lot. So we'll see. I'll keep an eye. Next one is going to be the Hulk. So yeah, that's a doozy. So we'll see what happens when I look at that. The story itself is still so solid. I mean, the pacing and the editing is great. It's still so. There's not a moment where I felt like as if I was bored or that it was too slow. There's just so much coming from the main actors. We got Paltrow, we got Bridges, and Robert Downey together, just melding with their great acting. The dialogue is fun and it's upbeat. I always thought that was just a choice of Favreau with his script, but then when you actually go into the behind the scenes, a lot of it was super on the fly, kind of just riffing off whatever each other were talking about. You know, case in point, Paltrow in that scene where she's dancing with Tony and she's wearing that open back dress and she's like complaining that it's embarrassing because Tony is a bit of a dog with women and she's his like employee, and also she forgot to put on deodorant, and that actually was just something that Paltrow was complaining about her on set, and Favreau was like, that's great, we'll just put that in because it's way more real and human, and it just gives great depth to the characters. And that is really the core of what made the rest of the movie so compelling, is that these super heroic characters are now fleshed out in a way where I can look at the comic books, the oldest ones, and they're just not people. They're just not really people. And then as they grow, as the time goes on, they add more slips of real life character and humanize them more. And now when it's been adapted to film, these like real people to me. Like Robert Downey Jr. is Tony Stark to me. Paltrow is Pepper Potts. They inhabit such a real ethos because of the way that they're portrayed, and it's all down to the directing, the script writing, and the actors, and they all deserve equal amount of credit for what they've been doing. The VFX, I know a lot of people complain that in the future installments They don't rely so much on physical, practical effects, and it is more obvious that he's in a VFX suit as opposed to a big, realistic, tangible suit built by Stan Winston's crew, who died the year it came out. That's awful? That's terrible. It's terrible, right? So terrible. Niche. Anyway, the special effects were, groundbreaking. They had managed to make a sci-fi concept of a humanoid armor suit that was wearable a reality. You look at that suit and it's functional. It seems to make sense. The way that he flies is incredibly well thought out. I always hated wireframe work, but if you actually look in the special features, they rigged up the wiring so that instead of it being on his center of gravity, they changed it so that the majority of the cables were coming from his feet, that the weight was coming from his feet. So when he's actually pushing down, he is pushing down on his feet. So it would be like as if the force is coming from the thrusters, which just lends so much more believability to his actions and the way he's moving around with his hands and arms. It just looks fantastic. It's something that I've always found annoying with movies. There were very few moments where I felt like the CGI or the VFX were dated in any way. Even so that it was in 4K, you would expect that this microscopic lensing onto the film would give light to imperfections with the VFX, and it just wasn't that bad. Like the texturing, the lighting, it's incredible. And ILM and Stan Winston's team, they changed movies forever from that point. This set a standard of what could be done, and it meant that anything could be done. It is weird seeing Terrence Howard as War Machine. I feel like his War Machine was far more of a conflict character for Tony, as opposed to Cheadle Bromance. The Cheadle Bromance is obviously superior. I mean, he's fantastic. I feel like Howard probably would actually became more of that bromancing character later on and didn't get to do that, but still Don Cheadle is War Machine now. He just is. And it is strange seeing these weird earlier ideas and why they didn't pan out, why actors were dropped, or full-on CGI renders were ignored and characters were changed. It's very strange, but I am glad that they changed that. Would I recommend it? I would absolutely recommend. If you're not gonna get the Infinity Saga but you want a 4K release to watch Iron Man. It looks great. It's a great movie. It's fun. It's such a funny, endearing film. The villain obviously is subpar for what we're expecting in the Marvel Cinematic Universe these days, but it is still a fantastic movie. It does deserve respect from all of the people who have loved the Marvel movies over the years. But also, almost forgot, Phil Coulson debuts in the first Iron Man. I love Phil Coulson. I didn't care for his role in Captain Marvel. I felt like he got sidelined, and it would have been amazing if he was more of a main character in that story. But I was just so glad to see his face. He was such a great character to see, and such a strange guy that stands toe to toe with these great, incredible people. I'm thoroughly looking forward to seeing the next Iron Man. I now have to watch The Incredible Hulk. I haven't watched it in years. I don't imagine I'm going to enjoy it as much as I'd like to, but I gotta watch it. I've got to see what it's like, especially seeing it in 4K. Anyway, that's my review. Definitely get out there to watch it. Thanks for the likes, love for the subs. I'll post next week on Friday. Later, guys.